Whoops, sorry guys. Chapter 4 of Sword Art Online. 1 month into the game, 2,000 people were dead. The hope that outside help would come had been crushed. Not even a message had gotten through. I didn't see it myself, but they said that the panic and the madness that took hold of players when they realized that they couldn't get back was unbelievable. There were people crying and others waiting. Some even tried to dig up the ground of the city and said they were going to destroy this world. Of course, all buildings were non-destructible objects, so this attempt failed without any results to show of it. They say that it took days for players to accept the situation and think of what to do after that. The players were split into 4 categories. The first consisted of over half the players. There were the ones who still wouldn't accept the conditions that Kayaba Akino had put forth and still waited for outside help. I understood what they were thinking painfully well. Their real lives would be lying on a bed, sitting in a chair, fast asleep. That was reality. The situation was fake. If there was even the smallest discovery, they might be able to get out. Of course, to log out the button was gone, but there might be something that the creators of the game might have overlooked. And the outside of the company who ran the game, Argus, would be trying hard more than anyone to save the players. If they could just wait, they might be able to open their eyes and have a teary reunion with their family, and then return to school or work, and this will all be just something to talk about. It wasn't really reasonable to think like that. I think I was hoping for the same thing deep inside. Their plan of action was to wait. That didn't take a single step out of the city and use money they had been allowed at the beginning of the game. The currency was coal in the city, sparingly buying only the food they needed to get through the day, finding cheap instant sleeping, and walked around in groups, spending each day without any thought. Thankfully, the starting city was about that took up 20% of the first floor surface and was large enough to hold the Tokyo district, so the 5,000 players would have some significant room to live in. But no one was forthcoming. However long they waited, one day some skies outside were not crystal blue, but covered with gray clouds. Their money couldn't last forever, and they realized that they would have to do something. The second category consisted of about 30% of or 3,000 players. It was a group that where all players were together. The leader of it was the admin of the largest game info site. The players who made it this category were split into several groups and shared all of their games, collected information of the game, and set out to explore the labyrinth area where the stairs were. The leaders of the group set up their base of operations, Black Iron Castle, and sent orders to their various groups. This huge group didn't have a name for quite a while, but after the members had received a uniform, somebody gave them a somewhat grim name, the Army. The third category consisted of an estimate of 1,000 players. It was made up of who all wasted all their coal but didn't want to make money by fighting monsters. As a side note, there were basically two bodily needs Sword Art Online. One was faggitude and the other was hunger. I understood why faggitude existed. Fatigue, that's probably what it is. Fatigue existed. Virtual information and real information were no different to the user's brain. If the players became sleepy, they could go into an inn and rent a room and sleep depending on the amount of money they had. If one stayed up a lot of coal, they could buy a house, but some need it wasn't small. Hunger was a need that many players thought of strange, although they didn't really want to imagine that was happening to their bodies in the real world, and most likely they were being force-fed nutrients somehow. That meant the emptiness was felt nothing had to do with our real bodies. But if we brought some virtual bread or meat in the game and ate it, the emptiness would disappear and we felt full. There was no way we found out this strange mechanism worked short of asking a professional in the field of neurology. So the opposite was true. The hunger doesn't appear unless we ate something. We most probably wouldn't die if we starved, but the fact that it's a need that's hard to ignore doesn't change. So the players visited the restaurants, the NPCs that ran daily, and ate some food, at least virtually. Also, there was no need to excrete waste in the game, as what was to happening in the world. I didn't want to think about it. Well, back to the main point. The players who had squandered all their money in the beginning, who couldn't sleep or eat, usually joined huge organizations that I mentioned a while ago, the Army, because they received at least something to eat if they followed the orders from the top. But there was always someone who couldn't even cooperate with others hard they tried. The ones who never wanted to join or got kicked out for causing too much trouble, using the slums of the starting city as their base and started thieving. Inside the city are places mostly refuge to safe areas. There was protection implanted by the system, and players couldn't hurt each other, but it wasn't like that outside. Staggers made teams with other stragglers and ambushed other players, which was in many ways more profitable than hunting monsters out on the fields or the labyrinth areas. Even then, they never murdered anybody, well, at least during the first year. The group slowly got larger until they reached an aforementioned number of 1,000. The final fourth category was simply said, the rest. There were 50 groups created by people who wanted to clear the game but didn't join the huge organization. They numbered around 500. We called these groups guilds. They had a mobility that the army lacked. Using the mobility, they steadily grew stronger. Then there were a few who chose to Merchant and Craftsman classes, the only numbered about 2 to 300, but they created guilds to their own and started training their skills that would need to earn coal they need to get by. The rest, around 100 players, were called solo players. This is the group I belonged to. They were the selfish group who decided that acting alone would be better for strengthening themselves and simply surviving. They could use the information they had, they could level up quickly. After they had gained the power to fight against monsters and bandits by themselves, there was truthfully no merit in fighting with other players. An additional feature of Sword Art Online, there was no magic. In other words, there was no long-range attacks with a 100% accuracy rate, so no one could fight large groups of monsters alone. If one had the required skills, playing solo was much more effective in getting experience points than party playing. Of course, there was risks involved. To give an example, a person was paralyzed and he held party members with him, they all just cure him, and that'd be that. But the person playing solo, he could lead straight to death. Actually, in the very beginning, solo players had the highest fatality rate amongst all the players. But if you had experience and knowledge to win throughout all this danger, there was much more better compensation for all the risk. And the beta testers, including myself, had both of these things. With the precise information, the solo players leveled up at a fierce pace, and huge gaps soon opened between them and the rest of the players. As the game had calmed down a bit, most solo players got out of the first floor and used cities in the upper levels as their bases. With this precious information, the solo players... Wait. Yeah, I just read that. Inside the Black Iron Castle, where the Room of Resurrected had been during the beta testing, there now stood a huge metal monument that hadn't existed during beta testing. The names of all 1,000 players were carved into the surface. In addition, a line appeared to the name of a person who died and gave it the time, cause of death, and next to it. The first person to get the honor of having his name crossed out appeared 3 hours into the game. The cause of death was not losing to a monster. It was suicide. He believed a theory that according to the structure of the nerve gear, if a person cut off from the system to automatically regain consciousness, he climbed over the iron fence of northern city at the edge of the arcade and flung himself off. He believed. Oh, I just said that. Beneath the floating castle was Ankar. No ground could be seen, however much you strained your eyes. There was only an endless sky with several layers of white clouds. As a countless player watched him, the boy got slowly smaller, leaving the loud screaming and disappearing into the clouds. The short line crossed mercilessly over the boy's name 2 minutes later. The cause of death was falling in midair. I didn't even want to imagine what he went through during those 2 minutes. There was no way of knowing if he returned to the real world, or as Kaiba said, he was brain fried. But most people believed there was such a simple way of escaping the game. The people outside already pulled the plugs and saved us, but there were still some who gave it into this easy of dealing with things, most including me. I found it hard to take death in Sword Art Online as reality. But that had still not changed. The phenomenon of HP bar reaching zero and the polygons that made up our bodies being destroyed was too much like the game over. They were too familiar with it. It was probably... Wow, that's actually spelled wrong. Yeah, no, seriously, it's actually spelled wrong. I know I'm getting off, but it's probable. It was meant to say probably, but it has an E at the end of it. Anyway, back to it. It was probably that the only way to understand the real meaning of death in Sword Art Online would be experienced at it yourself. This shanky truth would have been the reason that this decrease in the player slowed. On the other hand, a lot of players who were part of the army, especially the ones that had first belonged to the first group, started losing their lives while trying to clear the game and fighting monsters. Fights in Sword Art Online needed a bit of getting used to. It was less like trying to force yourself to wheel out, but entrusting your movements to the system. For example, even for a simple uppercut with the one-handed sword, if the player learned one-handed sword skills and then equipped uppercut from the list, they would only need to assume starting motion. Then the system would almost automatically move their body for them. But if someone without the skill tried to copy movements, would slow and weak to use in actual combat. It was like inputting commands in a fighting game. The people who didn't adjust this just swung their swords around them, even lost to boars and wolves they would have been able to beat if they had used the single strike skills they had by default. Even then, if they just gave up and ran away after losing some HP, they wouldn't have died. But unlike the attacks of the 2D monsters that we see through a monitor screen, the battling Sword Art Online were so real that you felt afraid if it was a real monster it was baring his teeth and giving you a chase with the intention of killing you. Even during the beta testing, there were some people who panicked in the middle of a fight, but now death awaited you if you lost. The panic-stricken players forgot about using their skills. Even running away, their HP disappeared and they were expelled from this world forever. Suicide, losing the monsters' number of crossed out names multiplied at a terrifying pace. When these reached 2,000, 1 month into the game, a cloud of despair hung over the surviving players. If the players' death kept increasing about this pace, all 10,000 players would be dead less than half a year. Clearing the 100th floor seemed like a mere dream. But humans adapt. A little more over a month later, the first labyrinth was cleared, and the numbers of deaths started to slow down quickly. People started spreading information in order to survive. The most people starting to perceive the monsters weren't all that scary if you gained enough experience points and leveled up properly. It might be possible to clear the game and return to the real world. The number of players that started thinking like this increased slowly but steadily. The top floor was still far away, but the players started moving with this vague hope, and the world started started turning again. Now, 2 years later, with 26 floors left, the number of survivors is around 6,000. This is the current situation in Ankard. And that's the end of chapter 4. Wow, it's actually pretty short. Peace out, guys.